Well, the pickup in the Kiwi economy over the past few years was good, almost as good as their rugby team. But it's now plateauing and facing many of the same headwinds as Australia. Both countries are exposed to China with our key commodities, milk and iron ore. Kiwi and Aussie households and governments have racked up similar levels of frightening debt. Growth and inflation aren't too far apart, both fairly lacklustre, and we even share the same big four banks. Concerningly though, for those banks, as well as regulators and politicians, both economies have housing markets almost too hot to handle. Government and regulators' plans to tackle that is where we diverge. And for more on what the Kiwis are doing on housing affordability, I spoke with respected economist Dr Oliver Hartwich from the New Zealand Initiative. Oliver Hartwich, inflation last week picked up to the Reserve Bank's target 2 years ahead of schedule. Now, what's this telling you about the New Zealand economy?
Well, I think the economy in New Zealand is in pretty good shape and has been for quite a while. That's why we've been talking about potential parity with the Australian dollar now for a few years. We are never quite there. But I think altogether New Zealand is doing well. We are expecting growth this year of around 3.5%. We are recording record inward migration, which also is a sign of our economy's success because we are attracting people, and New Zealanders who previously left for Australia are now staying home. And altogether, I think New Zealand is in relatively good shape.
Migration's been particularly helpful for the New Zealand economy. However, matching the Australian government, the New Zealand government is ramping up rhetoric against migration. Is this likely to make any difference?
Well, the government's been talking a little bit about tweaks to the migration system, but they haven't actually done too much to change it. So what they have introduced last week was a scheme whereby in the future you would count a migrant's salary towards the points score that migrant would get. And I think that makes sense because nominally we've got a few jobs, for example, on the skills shortages list, but there is a difference between a, say, fast food chef and a chef with 2-star Michelin from the Michelin Guide. We have a labour market which is quite tight. You talk to any employer in the country and they will tell you how difficult it is to find suitably qualified candidates. So I think the New Zealand economy is expanding, and that's why we have a need for migrants. What we need to do, of course, is we have to make sure that we build the houses that our migrants need, and we have to make sure that the country actually expands its infrastructure accordingly.
On that housing front, New Zealand, like Australia, has one of the most inflated markets in the world. What's the outlook for housing in New Zealand, and what strategies is the government thinking about to address affordability?
Well, the state of affair as it relates to housing in New Zealand is a relatively sad one because our house prices are totally out of control. We have a housing market that is in crisis, and that's particularly true of our largest city, Auckland, where house prices now are on average 10 times household income. And that is a situation that is simply untenable. The reason why our house prices are so high is not just because of high migration. Of course, migration contributes to the housing market problem, but actually the problems lie much deeper. We are simply not building the houses that the country needs, and we haven't been building the houses that the country needs for about 30 years now. And the main culprit there is the Resource Management Act, our town planning laws that make it really difficult for councils to build more land and free up land for development. And combined with that, I think, is a local government finance system which also makes it difficult to raise the necessary funds to really pay for local government infrastructure that you always need when it comes to developing new residential housing.
Now, New Zealand allows people to use superannuation savings to buy a home. It's an idea that continues to pop up here in Australia. What effect has it had on the market in New Zealand?
Can see the effect it has in New Zealand because basically it means you're withdrawing some of your retirement funds that are actually dedicated for your future retirement, and you put that money into the housing market. But when everybody does that, all it does is, of course, it bids up the prices, and therefore you don't actually help people buy a new home. All you do is inflate prices, and the people benefiting from that policy are not the first-time buyers. The people benefiting from that are those who are selling houses to first-time buyers.
Are there any plans to reverse the policy?
No, I haven't really heard any plans about that. What's currently the talk of the town when it comes to the housing crisis is actually, on the one hand, the Labour Party is talking about radical simplification of our planning laws. It is the Labour Party that is now talking about getting rid of height and density controls, getting rid of the rural-urban boundary that we put around our cities, and helping to privately finance infrastructure. On top of that, the Labour Party is talking about a national building program, a government-funded building program called Kiwi Build, where the party promises to build 100,000 homes over the next 10 years. And on the government side, there's more talk about planning reform. So I think there is a wide debate now about how this country should respond to the housing crisis, because more and more people are realizing that it is a crisis. And I think we can expect some real significant changes to our system after the September election, almost regardless of who wins that election.
The Kiwi Central Bank's been trying to address the affordability it's now in its third round of tightening up lending rules. Is it working?
I'm not sure whether it is actually working, because it really makes it very difficult for the central bank to really implement policies. Ideally, you would want to have a central bank that is only tasked with maintaining price stability, because that's really what we have central banks for. Once you actually conflate the targets for the central bank, you get a policy that's less predictable. And I think, therefore, the central bank intervening in the housing market and intervening with macroprudential regulations can only ever be a second-best policy. If you really want to make sure that we have house price stability and that we're really calming down our housing market, you have to build more homes. That is something that no central bank in the world could ever do. And so I think having the central bank tinker with a few regulations, macroprudential regulations on the edges, that may be a second-best solution, maybe a third-best solution, but ideally you would want to tackle the problem where it is, at the root, and that means building more homes.
And the central bank now has inflation within target, the economy continues to grow, and you've had a massive recovery in your key commodity, of course, milk prices. The central bank has said rates will remain accommodative for a considerable period. What does that mean?
Time has perhaps now come to actually move to a more conventional economic policy and monetary policy, because there are no more signs of a crisis in New Zealand. The economy is expanding quite nicely. Inflation has now reached target again. So I think sooner or later we should probably see a return to more normal central bank rates.
And of course, like Australia, New Zealand is very dialed into China as a major export destination. What's the New Zealand outlook on China, especially when it comes to milk?
It's not just milk, it is wine, it is tourism. New Zealand has a booming IT sector as well, which you can see here in Wellington. So I think it is more than just primary produce that matters for the New Zealand economy. And of course, it is more than just China, because there are other countries that we're dealing with and other countries that we have free trade agreements with. We have a free trade agreement in place not just with China, with Hong Kong, with Taiwan, with South Korea. And I think New Zealand has been very good playing that trade card for its advantage. It's a pity, of course, that we have that new administration in Washington that has killed the TPP. But I think the New Zealand government will probably find new trade avenues. And of course, especially with Brexit looming and the exit of Britain from the European Union, there you have another potential FTA that we would like to get.
Oliver Hartwich, thanks for your time.
Thank you.